Welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of the podcast that Hans and I do every single week. I have two special guests. One of them is my dear friend, Keith. He'll be joining us for today's discussion. And his daughter is also here to give us a very special introduction.
Hi, my name is Zoe. I like to draw. And welcome to Uncle Z and Hans YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is Zoe Griffin with a Y. Subscribe to my YouTube channel.
There you go, like a professional YouTuber. Thank you, Zoe. We'll kick it off with the Tesla bot. Some of you may have seen a clip of the Tesla bot folding a piece of clothing. This thing made the rounds for the last few days. Hans and I are people that obviously cover the Tesla space pretty closely on YouTube and X. My friend Keith here is obviously aware of the company and technology, but it's good to always bring somebody in that's not a maniac like Hans and I are, like crazy people. We actually have some normal, very good people to actually balance out our craziness here. So we're going to talk about the implications of that technology, what it could mean for the real world, so on and so forth. But I'll let Hans sort of kick it off. Do you want to maybe give us a little bit of insight into what the technology is doing, and then sort of your takeaways from what you saw from Tesla?
Yeah, so a few years ago, Elon kind of looked at the way that technology was kind of coming together, especially after all of the work that they'd been doing in the car to try and get the car to drive itself with the full self-driving software stack, and also kind of looking out at a lot of other parts of technology and realized that it was only a matter of time before we had artificial intelligence robots that could do all kinds of crazy, valuable, cool things. And the car was kind of the tip of the spear for that in his world, but he realized it was going to become a lot more general. It was going to touch a lot more things than that. And so it seems like he settled on the humanoid form factor as being one of the first main additional types of robots that didn't really exist to date that would need that. Obviously, a lot of the traditional industrial robots that we have today, those will get a lot better and a lot smarter with artificial intelligence as well. But as far as coming up with a new form factor that has not been successful to date, he wanted to go for the humanoid form factor. And the challenge of doing a humanoid robot has always been getting good brains. But that was the thing that he was solving with FSD, was an incredible robot brain. And so he's like, if we have the brain now, then the humanoid form factor becomes feasible. And not only is it feasible, but, basically the entire world is designed around being accessible and interactable by humans. So if we have a robot that is in the shape of a human, then it can do all kinds of things out of the box if it's smart enough. And so that was kind of the genesis of the project. And they have been working on that ever since. And over the past year, we've seen incredible progress on the development of the hardware for the Optimus robot. And in December, they revealed the Gen 2 prototype, which looks like it is very, very close to being the final design iteration of the hardware of Optimus. There's a lot left to go still on the software end of things. And so then the demonstration that they gave us for the folding of laundry was something that was being controlled by a human. And so that really shows us that they are working on trying to make the software of Optimus capable of doing these types of tasks that require a lot of coordination and dexterity, feedback with the real world. Shirts are obviously very flexible, they're thin, they're delicate, they require a lot of feel. It's not something that you can just program a dumb robot like, go here, go down, pinch, go up, go here, go there, drop. And so there's a lot that goes into that. And right now, the software can't do that task yet, but they wanted to make sure that the hardware could do it. So that's why they're testing these types of operations by remote controlling the Optimus Gen 2 robot with a human, see if the human who has all of the complex neural net software necessary to do those operations can do them through the physical body of the Optimus robot. And they were able to actually show that, yes, that is possible. And so that really demonstrates the capability of the hardware being at a very high level, and that most of the challenge that is left to solve now is the software challenge. But then the other piece that we also know, based on looking at a lot of different technology that's out there today, is that these software challenges are becoming easier and easier to solve. And we've seen, like, there's a robot project at Stanford that's a couple of grad students called Mobile Aloha. And they were able to show that in a very specific situation, so like, they could spill wine from a specific wine cup in a specific place, and that they could show a robot how to clean up that wine spill in that exact spot over and over again. And that if they did it 50 times, that then they could teach through artificial intelligence that robot to clean up that spill, and it would actually be able to get it right about 80% of the time. But then as soon as you take it to a different place, a different countertop or a different area in the room or something else, well, all of a sudden it can't do that task anymore yet. And so making that ability something that is really general is the challenge that they're working on next. But that's where Tesla is in a very unique place, because they have the foundation of working on full self-driving, which they are building and have always been building to operate in a very universal way, that it can drive in China and the United States. It can drive in Canada and India and Argentina and all these places. And so they have expertise that not a lot of other people have in trying to apply this advanced artificial intelligence software to general environments. And they're trying to bring that now to the bot. And then they also have the experience as a manufacturer of vehicles at large scale in actually making physical products to a high degree of quality and at high scale. And so they're really in a cool place in the overall landscape of being able to make these robots. And obviously, the opportunities that this affords, and also the disruption that this signals for humanity, for society, for culture, is pretty incredible. I think that we're looking at the next 10 to 15 years, society and culture will probably be changed more dramatically than they have been over the past 15 years by the iPhone. And so that's why we look at this technology, pay attention to it closely, and really try and understand it, because we realize that there's going to be a lot of things that we assumed were always going to be true because they have been true in our past that are actually not going to be true moving forward. And a lot of things that will be true in the future that were never true in the past. And, trying to really differentiate between the two and understand what opportunities that affords to us, and then the ways that we actually need to be careful about our assumptions so that we don't end up being dramatically wrong and put ourselves in a bad situation.
So, dumb question for you there, Hans. You talk about the FSD, obviously full driving, incredible, and some of the ways that it's translating into other realms, as you pointed out with laundry and so on and so forth. So what are some of the ways that that's being impacted? Is it just more of its ability to learn by looking at less situations, or is it looking at the data that's already collected, or is it a processing thing? And how would its ability to process and how fast it is versus how fast it's growing impact kind of the growth and where it's going, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So they really do have two pieces of things that they're working on as they're doing this folding of laundry task that is operated by a human. One of them is that they are trying to give it training data. And so there is a different video that they put out last year of a previous version of the Optimus robot, and they had it sorting blocks. And so they would put like 6 big Duplo Lego blocks out, and it would have to pick up 2 different colors. There was green ones and blue ones. It would put the blue ones in a blue bin and the green ones in a green bin, and it would actually turn them, they would be dropped in a random orientation, and it would have to put them in the box right side up. So it'd have to turn them and manipulate them and all that stuff.
Yeah, because that's my biggest question is, are we using the data that we've collected through FSD, or is it the ability to learn that is really being leveraged, such as like I can knock it out in much fewer examples because I've learned so much? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, which one is it?
That's a great question. So it's going to learn much faster in the future. And the thing that they did with the blocks is they had humans do that telerobotically, just like they're doing right now with the folding of the laundry, a number of times. But eventually, just by doing that, then the robot was able to learn to do it autonomously. And it's going to start out where we're doing a lot of those individual tasks very much like that. So where each thing you'll have to learn, but it's not going to be generalized. And each time you teach it that, it's going to be slow. But over time, what they have done with full self-driving is that's kind of where they started with full self-driving as well. And not necessarily in a neural net coded way. So it was less artificial intelligence. It was more traditional software programming, but they were doing that type of overall architecture where they're looking at a specific problem and they would solve that one specific problem locally. And then over time, they were able to make that more and more general. One of the things that we know about full self-driving today is that they're able to do a lot of automatic learning at scale across the entire training data that they have available to them through the entire fleet of the cars. And as they grow the fleet of Optimus, they will be able to do the same thing. And that's really when we'll see the learning scale that as they kind of have to get the software architecture good enough for these bots to be able to walk around by themselves and not fall down. That's one of the challenges that they have, is they have to keep these things on a gantry right now. And so they can't really let them loose in a factory to go learn stuff. Even if they're being controlled by a human, I think they still I don't think they've even figured out telerobotic walking that doesn't fall down periodically. And so once they solve those problems, then they can start really increasing the number of these that they have out in the learning environment. And then the more there are that can learn at the same time, the more data that they can get. I think right now they're in the phase of building up the data flywheel for Optimus, that they have already built up that data flywheel for FSD.
So walking is hard. Just ask my toddler. Walking is hard. You fall down all the time. It is what it is.
Shocking how hard it is.
It's horrible and also comical at the same time, but it is not easy. So so what I'm hearing you say is that it's not necessarily the data that you've collected with FSD, more of the collective ability to learn and share it with other like-minded AI that is really what's going to put them ahead. Is that what I'm learning how to learn?
Yes. So the data, learning how to learn is going to be one of them, and having the right architecture that can learn by itself once they have the data pipeline set up. That now they know how to, once you have a giant pool of data, they know how to build a system that can learn from a giant pool of data and constantly update itself, constantly get better, and not only get better, but get better faster. And they know how to solve all these challenges.
Yeah. So if I give you use your toddler as an example. So Keith has a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1.5-year-old, right? And so when the 1.5-year-old is, when he learned how to walk, right? Mm-hmm. He learned how to walk by a mixture of, it's sort of embedded in our system somehow, in our DNA, to be able to learn how to walk. Yep. But then also how he learned how to walk faster, how he learned how to walk more smoothly without having to fall down. That was repetition. Yeah, and watching other people do it as well, right? It's literally the same exact framework that humans use to learn. Yeah. The breakthrough here is that it seems like Tesla's on the route to figure out how to put that in a machine, so that the machine learns through observation and through practice. And then there's this thing, and then Hans is more knowledgeable here, this thing called inference, that it kind of can take all that data that it has collected and it can make new decisions based on the data it already has that is the correct decision, and it doesn't necessarily have to even see that situation in the past.
But what's really interesting to me that Hans pointed out was, I mean, that all of that is undoubtedly true, but it sounds like there's some community learning where it can take that data and share that data 100%. To where you have more people, or more in this case, more machines learning, which is going to be give that exponential effect. Is that correct,
yes.
Hans?
100%.
Yeah, which is.
So like if one bot learns how to fold laundry, all bots know how to fold laundry.
And you have an army of laundry bots.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And one of the things that I do want to put a fine point on that people really underestimate is just how hard it is to learn to walk. And there are advantages that we have as people in learning to walk that, when you learn to walk, you're like a foot to 2 feet tall and you weigh like 25 pounds and your bones are squishy. And so when you fall down and you fail over and over and over and over and over again, you don't get broken. Right now, these robots, they're almost 6 feet tall. They weigh 130 pounds. They do not have flexible bones, and they cost millions of freaking dollars. Yeah. And when they fall down and break, it's really expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very true. That's very, very true. So based on everything you've heard so far, like where does your brain take you? Like where's your head at with this?
No, I mean, again, just the community learning and the exponential community learning really drives home why we were talking about in a previous podcast, just why everything is exponentially growing. I think that's the community aspect of it that I was not aware of.
Yeah.
As just a non-Tesla, AI person. I find really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, as for folding clothes, it's cool because I'll be honest, when I saw folding clothes, I wasn't initially impressed because I'm in IT consulting, and to me, it's you have X requirements, you can train them to do these things. So on its face, it doesn't look that difficult, but when you put in texture and you put in just how wavy, like some cloth or like, God help me, a fitted sheet or something, then I can understand why that would be a much bigger task. So
exactly. And you think about the layers that you need there to be able to do that properly. You need a very accurate sort of mechanical movements to be able to handle that. But then you also need the brain to dissect every single piece of clothing is going to be different. So like if I fold my clothes versus my wife's clothes, like folding clothes is literally my least favorite task in the everybody knows this that follows my channel. I freaking hate folding laundry because it's non-standard. I can't just sit down and just do bloop, bloop, bloop. Here's a shirt that's folded, or I got to fold differently for a set of pants. My wife's clothes, every single piece of clothing she has, I have to fold it differently because none of them are the same shape. So like, but how did I learn to do that? I learned to do that by observing and practicing, right? And it wasn't like somebody sitting at a computer telling my brain how to fold the thing. I learned how to do it through action. And so the thought process here is this bot isn't just going to be able to do that just for laundry. It's going to be able to do that for absolutely anything where a human form factor would be used to do that thing.
But again, like for me, I'm not overly impressed that I mean, it could be 1,000 different articles of clothing. You can put in, here's your article of clothing. Here's how you want it folded. And those are pretty distinct requirements.
It would just take a lot of time, right?
That in itself is not impressive. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? What's impressive to me is if I'm folding that sheet or I'm folding that shirt and the cloth drips down. Well, in a machine's world, that is a completely different requirement because it is no longer at 90 degrees. It is at 65 degrees.
Correct.
Or whatever. So you've got ever-changing requirements in a live environment, not unlike the FSD, which is where I would assume
you got it.
Which is why it's so impressive, and that's why they've got such a big start because again, ever-changing world.
You got it. That's you nailed it. Like that complexity of the real world. So Hans has coined this term of meat space GPT, and so like ChatGPT kind of is like a thing that can sort of alter the digital world to give you an answer, and it can like sort of mold, it can adapt to the digital world. This technology, think of it as like a GPT, but for the meat space, like reality. And that AI
It's a 4-dimensional GPT kind of thing.
Literally, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, for what you termed the live environment, but the live environment in the real world, not just the live environment in a purely digital space. So yeah, the meat space, refers to that, just the real world 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional universe, and be able to interact in an embodied way, whether that's a car, whether that's a humanoid robot, whether it's an industrial robot, whether it's, your smart Roomba in the future that's not such a giant piece of crap that is so dumb that you want to throw it across the room. Like all of those things are in meat space.
Yeah, exactly. So has that changed your where's your head? Where's your head as we're going through this?
I mean, you're not going to have to convince me about the.
And we're not trying, right?
No, I'm just talking about in general. Like, I'm a huge fan of FSD just in general. So so my opinion hasn't changed on that. I wholeheartedly believe. Now, I'm not like you, where you're like, oh yeah, like next week everything's gonna be driving itself. It's going to be it's so annoying. But anyway, it's going to take time through not because of the technology. It's the outside circumstances, the headwinds through, competing parties that don't want it around, government interaction, those sorts of things. It's going to take a lot, like people just in general being very afraid of change and new things just as a society.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's going to take a lot longer, but generally speaking, I think it's much safer. I pray to God that by the time my kids are 16, 17, the cars drive themselves. I don't want a teenager driving multi-ton pieces of metal at high speeds. We don't like that. Nobody wants that. Yeah. So I believe it's the future, and I think it's great. Again, something that I'm really excited about this conversation is I haven't really taken the time to take that and translate what other environment modifying circumstances could we use this for? Yeah. Which I think is really cool. Right. Yeah. So
and this is where I get really excited, because you think about physical labor, right? You think about any job that a human does today that uses, we use our hands, right?
Sure.
There's nothing that is preventing this robot outside of advancements in technology and its capability of manipulating reality.
Yeah.
That wouldn't allow it to do the same exact thing a human can. So literally think of every single task a human can do right now with their hands: construction, lawn care, housekeeping. Just literally go down the list. We use our fingers, our arms, and our legs and our torsos to manipulate the world, right? And we use our brains to make decisions on how to manipulate the world.
But I still think so. But again, I still think we're a ways away, because I go back to my kids' example that we used, right? Right now, we're learning how to walk. So we're very much in my toddler phase right now, right? And then I know we have talked about this ad nauseum. Z and I have this thing called, basically I call it for my kids.
Hold on a second. People don't know my nickname Z.
Oh,
we should probably say it. No, it's fine. Z's fine. It's perfect.
But anyway,
call me Z. Z's fine, dude.
Right,
I don't want you. You should call me Z for literally 20,000 years. It's weird for you to call me Farzad.
It's kind of weird. I'm not gonna lie. But anyway, with my kids, I tell them, we talk about. I have a thing called the asset liability line for my kids, where my kids become. I love all my kids. I want to point that out, but. The asset liability line is, at what point do my kids become more of an asset than a liability in the household, as far as asking them to do things? Yeah. I've come across, it's about 5.5.
Okay.
But anyway, it seems like they're around the toddler phase now, learning how to walk, learning how to use your hands. There's still so much more we're gonna have to learn, even to get to where my 4-year-old's at, where you can tell them to do direct things. Yeah. And then the next step, which I would assume is probably 5 to 10 years, depending on the growth of exponential growth, would be my 6-year-old. She can look at something and use the critical thinking and say, okay, here's what I was given. How else can I expand that? And I think that's where we ultimately need to go if we're going to replace, the human manual labor.
So where does your head go, Hans, when he says that?
Yeah, I love the idea of an asset liability line in a person. Man, that just sent me down a whole rabbit trail of thinking of when I managed people. I'm like, all my employees were liabilities. They were never assets. I had to teach them everything. But there's different dimension of things that robots are incredibly good at that humans are not necessarily good at, that distorts the thinking on an asset liability line. And that is their ability to repeat something over and over and over again. And so, once they have, like right now, one of the things that they could do is there's a lot of jobs in a factory where a person either stands or even sits completely still, and then they work at a desktop. And so they don't have to have walking necessarily solved in order to do that job, as long as the job itself is very simple and repeatable. And that's what a lot of factory jobs are. And so there are going to be lots of specific environments or specific use cases right now that are jobs that need to be done, that are valuable economic activities that the robot will be able to do early on in its development phase, before it's, necessarily an asset at the human general scale, where it can be an asset at a local small scale that contribute to its overall learning, that it can do, when it's equivalently 1 year old or maybe even 6 months old. And the more of those things that we discover, the more of those bots that we get out there, because of the dynamic of fleet learning or collective learning, the faster the overall engine spins. And the more, because one of the nice things about bots, we did talk about the fact that if they fall down, they break, but you don't lose the learning from that robot when it falls down and breaks. Even if it dies, that learning still gets to be extracted and used in other bots. And the same will be true for, a number of different use cases. And so it goes back to the thing that you were talking about earlier of just exponentiality, that as we get more bots in the fleet doing something that is useful, then the collective knowledge base of Optimus as a project overall grows much, much faster. And there's going to be a number of these things that are incredibly, and it can do all of that while being incredibly profitable, because there's so many dumb things that humans have to do for work that they can earn money at.
So I'm not sure we can cover this today, but something that where my mind
yes, we can.
So something my mind goes to this, because I look at factories and I look at production and all these things, right? And I look at just the world today. Most of these incredibly repetitive tasks, clothing, even iPhone production or whatever, does not happen in America. It happens in other countries. Your Vietnam, your China, your Indonesia, your South Americas, whatever, right? So so I just go back to thinking, how would that work? So say we exponentially grow this 1,000 times in the next 5 years. Would that bring back the technology closer to home? Or would that, as a company, would that be like, hey, we need to bring this home because it would be quicker and cheaper for us to do so, as opposed to paying somebody $2 an hour or $1 an hour? Or will we export that technology out into factories that already exist? And how would that impact the world? What would that look like?
I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer, I'm going to skip way deep into the future, and I'm going to tell you about the world that I expect to see, 20 years or 30 years or 40 years from now, whatever that timeline ends up being, that it's hard to quantify. But the transition from here to there is going to be crazy messy, and I have no idea what that part is going to look like.
Yeah, I'm not thinking 30, 40, 50 years. I'm thinking the next 5 to 10 years,
So I think the technology will be there pretty soon. The reason that I go out that far is because it's going to take us a long time to build out. We're going to have billions of robots. There's probably going to be more robots than humans at some point. And building up that fleet of robots is going to take a long time. So that's why, I kind of get deep into the future. So in that future where we have robots that can do basically anything that we need to have done that we don't want to do, then you can have a good or a service that you would like that is perfectly customized and tailored to your needs and your preferences in very, very small amount of time. That your services will basically be instantly available on demand, and your products will have a relatively short lead time, that you'll have, the Amazon robot in your house that will make you the good from a variety of whatever raw materials that it needs pretty quickly, or there will probably be some sort of like local factory where the robots will do that, and then they'll be, delivered to your house. And so we're not going to be making goods way far away where the standard of living for people is really low, and we can employ them for way less than we can afford to employ them here, where we have a much higher standard of living. And there's that arbitrage there, and that's one of the ways that we give economic value to them, and they provide economic value to us, and we kind of all raise the standard of living together, even though some places are much, much higher than others. I think we get to a place where almost every person on the planet has a standard of living that is higher than the richest person today. And they have the freedom and the challenge, the responsibility to find out for themselves what gives their life meaning and purpose. So that is the challenge, the blessing, the incredible opportunity, and the thing that is absolutely scary, because right now a lot of people, we derive our meaning from the service or the products that we can provide to other people that make our time worthwhile. And so that's going to be kind of a crazy future.
How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean,
looks like you have doubt in your eyes.
No, well, first off, I think it's again, going back to what we were talking about before. I think that the ability to do something versus making it a reality are two very different things. And change is hard just by nature. We're wired as human beings to not take in too much change too quickly. Mm-hmm. So, I think this is definitely a long-term thing. Like, not sure, like we may see it in my lifetime where humans don't have to do anything. But again, I think we had the technology maybe in the next 10 years. Yeah. But again, it's selling it to the public. It's getting that change of mindset that I think is going to be the bigger challenge, personally.
Go ahead, Hans.
I like the term that you use there, selling it to the public. And that is actually exactly how the public is going to adopt these things, is because it's going to win on the economic merits. So people are going to buy the things that are made more inexpensively and at higher quality. And as the technology gets better, that's inevitably going to shift towards things that are produced robotically and by artificial intelligence more and more. And so it's going to be an economic forcing function that drives a lot of this. And then there's going to be, at the human and society and cultural layer, a very large conflict and tension that we have to resolve of how do we make sure that individual people or groups of people don't get left behind as those markets shift.
So let me give you an example of what I'm trying to thinking about here. Like, I have no doubt that tomorrow, I mean, look at cars today. We can build a car in 5 minutes that would take a person or a team years to build. And that is because of machines, because of AI, because of programming, what have you. But the AI and the programming don't take credit for the car. Tesla or Ford or Chevy or whoever takes credit for the car. What I see and what I envision happening here is you have massive, production and massive gains for, let's use the car example with Ford, right? You have an AI that makes a much better car, much cheaper, much faster. Well, if I'm Ford, what do? I cut ties with, the union. I lay everybody off because I no longer need employees. Okay, well then your average person doesn't look at this awesome product that AI created. They see 10,000 people laid off with no jobs. So it's not the technology, it's the cultural shift that we have to think of, is how are we going to handle, perfect example is trucking, the trucking industry. Trucking is the number one industry in the nation, period. There are more trucking jobs than anything else. More McDonald's, cab drivers, technical architects, whatever, So what happens?
Technical architects is so specific.
I know. That's a horrible example.
I get what you're saying, though. Yeah.
But yeah,
most jobs. Yeah.
Landscapers, whatever,
Yeah.
Should have just said architects. Either way, the point still stands, right? Like, if I'm Tesla and I have an awesome semi that has fleet technology where that fleet is exchanging information, saves gas on the economy, it's electric, so obviously, but it's saving energy, it's faster, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it makes everything cheaper. Chances are Tesla's going to pocket that in the stock prices, and then they're going to lay off every single truck driver that they're connected with, or they're going to sell it to Walmart, or they're going to lease it out to Walmart. Walmart's going to be like, this is awesome. I don't have to pay this, truck health insurance. I don't have to pay this truck. It can work 24/7. This truck isn't sleeping at a truck stop. So, all the Walmart, drivers are automatically unemployed. As a society, how do we counter that without going to the typical, what our worst impulses of fear mongering? Oh, this is dangerous. Oh, this is the elite screwing the little guy. How do we fundamentally change that? Because again, that's a huge AI innovation. That's a huge FSD innovation. But your common guy isn't going to see that. Your common guy is going to say, the elite screwing us. We have, these are a million people out of the job. The world's ending. It was so much better in my day, blah, blah, blah. So that's, to me, that's the bigger challenge than even the growth. And that's why it's going to take a lot longer than I think.
First, there's one wrinkle in this that I just want to throw in there for people to think about, is that most of these technologies are not going to be an overnight switch where, like, today there are no smart trucks and tomorrow there are, a world's worth of smart trucks, and all the truck drivers end up getting fired or, losing their jobs. And so there's not this concrete, before and after thing. Just like FSD is something that takes time to figure it all out and deploy and build up the fleet to where it can actually displace lots of miles driven. And so, yeah, a lot of these things are going to have phases. Now, there are going to be some of them where that phase is a lot shorter than others and going to be a lot more acute. I am a huge proponent of just aligned incentives in general. And the way that I hope that we solve this, and the way that I would advocate that we solve this, is that people who are going to be displaced by a technology need to be given at least the opportunity, if not just straight out, given some amount of ownership of the upside of whatever that thing is.
But you know what, though? You know what they're going to say? And I think we're going to talk about this a little later on, is they're going to say, oh, well, that's socialism. Oh, you're taking that's going to be the narrative that gets displayed.
That is a great point. One of the things I was just thinking about today is that Jason Calacanis said something about the fact that we're, facing this big challenge in climate change, and that he's all for collectivism in the context of solving the climate crisis. And I responded to that, and I said, I would much prefer free markets to solve that problem, because I don't think collectivism is actually going to get us there. That really got me thinking about that word collectivism or socialism or communism or these types of things. And I think that maybe there's a different way of thinking about that ethos of having a responsibility to a community than any of those words. And I think it's voluntary or bottom up collectivism or community responsibility versus top down. And I think, this will kind of lead into our discussion about, the speech that Andre Mallet gave. And that is a core piece of what capitalism unleashes, is that people can exchange value between one another completely freely, completely of their own volition, and that as long as that transaction is not tinted by force or tinged by resentment after the fact, that is an incredible thing. And the more transactions in the entire world that can happen in that context, I think the better the world is overall. And so I think that hopefully the people that develop these technologies will have that sense of community responsibility to where they are willing to engage in activities that may seem socialist at the top level, but really they're bottom up, their voluntary acceptance of responsibility for other people by the person who's taking that on as they develop these technologies that are really technologies that ultimately are designed and architected and being built from the get-go for the good of humanity and society overall. I mean, I personally am so thankful for all of the technologies that were developed throughout the Industrial Revolution that mean that today I can earn a living sitting here in my closet talking to a microphone on a camera instead of have to spend my entire life either working in a field or, a turn of the century factory where I'd be losing limbs or fingers, where I might die. And, the next person, they would just throw them in there and keep going. That the march of technology over time has provided us with an incredible opportunity, and that more people today, as a percentage wise, that I think it's 95% is what Andre was saying, of all people on the earth now live above the poverty line, instead of, if you go back 200 years ago, and it was 95% of all people on the earth lived below the poverty line. And I think that we can get to a point where in the future, 100, 200, 300 years from now, 100% of all people live not only above the poverty line, but they live with a standard of living that is effectively equivalent to the richest people on earth today, and hopefully in a society that's stable.
So question, what would you define the poverty line? Because the reason I bring that up is because, like, for instance, somebody who is what we would consider poverty today in America, they're still living better than like Charlemagne or like Henry VIII, just because over time, as you pointed out, technology and just human experience has made the collective, better.
So when I say the poverty line, I am referencing kind of, there's an official, I think it's World Bank definition of what that is. And I mean, it used to be that they called that $1 a day, I think, on the international scale. And then, Americans typically were all, even the poorest of Americans are typically above that line. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure which metric he was referencing. I would assume it's something along that line. But that is something to think about, that I don't think a lot of people who look back at history with kind of this rose-colored fondness realize just how brutal life was for almost everybody. And that, that is something I explicitly think about, that living in this house that I live in today, I would not trade this to go back and be King Louis XIV of France, or, even the president of the United States 100 years ago.
Yeah.
No.
But I do think the one comment you made earlier on, Hans, that was very interesting, and I think just maybe a little bit of a rebuttal from my end on that, is that I do think there is a chance that the transition to a automated AI age could be a lot more drastic than we think. Not because one single technology will have a long or short tail of sort of, if trucking might take 10 years, but cashiers will take, 5 years or whatever. It's just the underpinning of that technology will happen in basically every sector. So it's like you're having the semis and the cashiers and the warehouse workers and the factory workers and the lawn people and the construction workers, and they're all being impacted at basically the same time. And that's where I'm concerned, because it's all the same. It's meat space GPT. Mm-hmm. It's all meat space GPT. And so that's where I'm really concerned, because if you're taking the ChatGPT example and saying, okay, ChatGPT is disrupting coding, it's disrupting writing, it's disrupting copyright, it's disrupting creative work, things like DALL-E and Midjourney are disrupting art, mm-hmm. digital type things or more art type professions, it's all across the board, right? But if you apply that to the physical world, that's where a gigantic majority of the world's population are. The sort of this digital, like you and I, the three of us that get to work from home like a bunch of morons, right? Like we're the luckiest people on earth. We are extremely lucky because we get to leverage the sort of the innovations that have happened in this space and use it to our sort of advantage to be able to have some semblance of a career or passion or whatever you want to call it. But when 50% of the world's population gets disrupted by this at roughly the same time, do we have, like, what's the replacement there? So, like, not everyone's going to turn into a YouTuber, are they? You know what I'm saying?
God help us if that's the case.
Yeah,
but,
like, you know, it's going to get really, really freaking weird. And that's where, like, your discussion about, you know, like how that's going to be handled by politicians and people in power and whatnot. I think what we're seeing today is a little bit of that already. And that's why I think people like Trump in particular are so popular nowadays, because the one thing that I agree with quite a bit, which is something Andrew Yang said back when he was running for president in 2019, 2020, was that one of the reasons why someone like him becomes so popular is because you have a number of people that feel like they don't have an ability to take part in the economy because their localities where they live have just been destroyed through outsourcing or through technology. But it has happened over 30, 40 years, right? Whereas something like AI and artificial intelligence, or whatever you want to call it, robotics, automation, it could do that as well. It could take 20, 30 years, but it's 20, 30 years of like literally every physical job on planet Earth at the same time. Oh, and by the way, that technology gets better over time, even faster, because that same technology can make itself faster.
So, to piggyback off of that, Z, I'm thinking that, you know, all of those things collectively at the same time, that's going to displace a lot of people. Again, maybe people that don't quite understand the benefits of technology and don't understand the benefits because they're off, you know, working in, you know, maybe they're a mechanic, or maybe they're a farmer, or maybe they're, you know, whatever, right? And in order to compensate for that displacement, you're probably going to need something at some point, like a Andrew Yang example, a UBI, you know, universal basic income, where you provide, you know, whoever with a standard base of living, because if you don't, because they no longer have the ability to provide a job, or there are not enough jobs around to supply the population. But then you go back to, okay, well, that's the collectivism, which is socialism, which is a dirty word in America in particular, right? So how do we come to terms with that as a society and a collective unit?
The large scale of this and how you potentially acute it becomes when you have so many different verticals being disrupted all at once. That is, I 100% agree, really unnerving to think about and scary. And I don't know how we're going to solve that issue. It's going to be a massive problem. That's going to be a huge, huge, huge challenge. So one of the people that I really like to listen to and think about this topic through his perspective is George Hotz. And his idea is, instead of, you know, giving, he's deathly afraid of UBI. He doesn't want anyone giving him the money that it takes to acquire things. He said the future that he's hoping for and he's working towards is a future in which, instead of the government giving us, you know, whatever it is, $1,000, $2,000 a month to live on, but then you have no idea what that is going to translate into as far as purchasing power. He's like, let's use technology to make everything so cheap that, you know, you could have the standard of living of someone who is a king for $100 a month or $200 a month if we drive the scarcity of those goods and services to basically zero, so that they're abundantly available to everyone. Then people don't necessarily feel like in their life they have fallen behind as technology has moved ahead. So I think that something that, if we can arrive at a place like that more, then that will definitely be something that helps to mitigate the challenges of that kind of mass disruption all at once. And I think the more people have access to use this technology for themselves, you know, the more mechanics and factory workers, warehouse workers, and all of these things that actually have access to use some sort of tools that are either robotic tools or artificial intelligence tools, for themselves in their own businesses, and the more we have entrepreneurs who have the ability to provide services to other people, the closer we get to basically on the ground, bottoms up use of the technology, then the less people are getting left behind and the more people feel like they have opportunities in front of them instead of they have things that are being stolen from them. And so if we have a lot of this stuff being the innovations and the benefits of those innovations, if they're made by large corporations or governments or these huge entities that we feel like are very far away from the people, then that's a future in which I'm much, much, much more scared. But then on the flip side, if open source technology makes this stuff freely available, and we also have the resources to teach people who don't feel like, this is one of the things that I do have a little bit of hope for, is the fact that artificial intelligence makes interacting with AI technology like a human accessible. That you don't have to be a Stanford educated computer scientist in order to leverage the power of code. And so if we can make this stuff accessible to normal everyday people who can be totally blue collar Joe Schmo, and put something in their hands that is so powerful that they can actually use it to make more money in the job that they already have, that's a future in which I'm much, much less concerned about this technology being something that unravels society instead of advances us to a new stage of abundance.
Yeah, I suspect you're right, particularly around, like, I suspect that's how it will go, to be honest, where the transition, where these people won't like lose their job, for instance. Maybe they'll have, you see it already. You have like with the truck driver example that we keep on going back to. I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's already pretty much driving itself, but you have the truck driver to assist. So it's assist technology. It's not we're driving for you technology. So that might be the bridge that gets us there, is that we just slowly phase out the assist over time, right? So
yeah, I think what's interesting about that though is like I think the definition of a job could just change. Maybe that's one of the solutions. It's just like you would just accept that we're just doing this because we don't want to feel like we're completely useless. Like we'll just ride along. Like for example, like an airline pilot, their job is very important because they're there to ensure that 200 some odd people don't die in a fiery freaking ball, right? When they try to land the plane. But in reality, we already have technology that does 99.9% of the plane going from point A to point B. It's just the human is there to ensure that nothing goes wrong, And there's literally nothing, I don't think there's absolutely anything stopping us from completely automating that entire thing end to end outside of that thing of we may have to lay off literally every single pilot on planet Earth, right? So, if you view AI through that lens, why couldn't we just take the same sort of, approach to every job that has ever existed and say, let's just admit the fact that we're not going to be productive anymore because an AI can do that 1,000 times faster than we can. We're just there along. It's like we're literally like, like in a car, you have like the kiddie wheel for like your kid on the right. Could that just be the future? Like we're like, ooh, look, I'm driving, but it's really just like, yeah, but you're not. But if we don't have that available for you, you're gonna kill yourself. Like could that be the future we're going down the route on?
I mean, to be honest, I think one of the comments we made earlier is really more of the future of the economy or human value in society, and that is everyone becoming their own content creator. Is really like, if you don't have to do things that are productive, I really do think that, so Thomas Sowell has this line that an economy is basically just a distributed system for allocating scarce goods and resources. So in a future where physical goods and resources are no longer scarce, then the economy doesn't have anything to do with physical goods and resources. But it's continuing to be scarce in that future: human attention, human emotion. And so I think that the ability of humans to connect with one another, to share information and ideas that resonates with other humans, really is going to become a larger percentage of the overall economy. And I think that content and relationships are a huge part of that. I think that, there's always going to be a market by humans for the authenticity of experiences that are shared with other humans. Like, there's definitely going to be a huge market for completely synthetic, artificially generated experiences, videos of fake people doing fake things and those types of things. But I think that those, over time, the value of those things get driven to zero because the availability of them is completely non-scarce. And that you come back to there being a special value that is placed on things that are authentically human.
There's always going to be a scarcity, though, because if nothing else, there's the illusion of scarcity, right? We see that everywhere in society today, to bring up value, to bring up wealth. To exactly your point, insulin is basically free, $15. They make it absurdly expensive because of the illusion of scarcity. De Beers diamonds. De Beers has 90% of the diamonds in the world locked up in some vault. The reason they do that is because they want to make diamonds, valuable. Even though they're super common, we want to make them valuable because, again, that drives up the value. There's a million examples out there. So again, I don't think that's so much a technology thing as much as it's a societal thing that we have to get over the illusion of scarcity. Food's another reason. Most of our food wastes away, but we don't even eat it.
Yeah. I think what it comes down to is, will humans be able to put, if I'm thinking through that, why would we do that in the first place? Part of it, the scarcity. I think a lot of it is greed, right?
It's 100% greed.
It's greed. It's just it's the human nature of, well, if I do this, I make more money, right? So if you have tools and technologies that can make almost everything infinitely available, then what's the mechanism to prevent the company from not doing that?
Going straight to beers on you, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Saying, hey,
that's very true.
We can make this in 2 seconds, but
the technology existing also means that anyone theoretically can have access to it. So their competitors, there's going to be infinite competitors to the beers, or whatever that diamond company is, and that's where if you have societal systems that prevent that from happening, that's where we could have an issue.